The observation deck of the Vraxian battlecruiser hummed with nervous energy. Commander Thelkar stood before the reinforced viewport, his three eyes fixed on the impossible scene below. In the containment habitat, designed to hold the galaxy's most dangerous specimens, a human sat cross-legged on the ground. Around her, 7 Vraxian cubs slept in a peaceful pile. No one had expected this. "She hasn't moved in 4 hours," whispered Science Officer Miran, her tendrils twitching with anxiety. "The cubs?" "They're completely calm." Lyra, the human, sat with her back straight and her eyes half closed in meditation. Her hand rested gently on the massive head of Corin, the largest cub, whose scaled body rose and fell with deep, contented breaths. The other 6 cubs had arranged themselves around her legs, under her arms, against her back, a configuration that would have been a death sentence for any other species in the known galaxy. Vraxians were apex predators. Even as cubs, they possessed retractable claws that could slice through starship hull plating and jaws strong enough to crush reinforced bones. 3 months ago, when the cubs had been confiscated from illegal breeders, it had taken a full combat squad with stun weaponry to safely transport them. 2 soldiers had still ended up in medical bay. Then Lyra had volunteered. "Absolutely not," Thelkar had said when she'd made her request. "Humans may be durable, but you're not invincible. Those cubs would tear you apart within seconds." Lyra had smiled, that peculiar human expression that could mean so many things. "With respect, Commander, they won't. You can't possibly know that. Actually, I can. I've raised predators before. Back on Earth, I worked with creatures you'd consider just as dangerous. Maybe more." Thelkar had pulled up her file. The images had been disturbing. Lyra standing beside massive fanged creatures called tigers. Lyra with her arm around a bear that stood 3 times her height. Lyra surrounded by a pack of wolves, all of them watching her with what looked like reverence. "These animals," he'd said slowly, "they would kill their own kind without hesitation. Yet they seem to respect you." "They don't respect me, Commander. They trust me." "There's a difference." Against his better judgment and the protests of his entire senior staff, Thelkar had allowed a supervised test. Lyra had entered the habitat alone, carrying nothing but her confidence and a pouch of dried meat treats. The cubs had charged immediately. Every weapon on the observation deck had been armed and aimed. Fingers trembled on triggers. In 3 seconds it would be over, another human lost to their inexplicable overconfidence. But Lyra hadn't run. She'd dropped to one knee, made herself smaller, and made a sound. A low, rumbling noise from deep in her chest. Not quite a growl, not quite a purr, something in between. The cubs had skidded to a halt. Corin, the alpha of the little pack, had approached first. His head had been low, ears back, eyes calculating. Lyra hadn't looked directly at him. Instead, she'd extended her hand, palm down, and waited. The cub had sniffed, circled, sniffed again. Then he'd rubbed his massive head against her hand. Within an hour, all 7 cubs had been following her around the habitat like she was their mother. Within a day, they'd been playing with her, carefully as if they understood she was more fragile than they were. Within a week, they wouldn't eat unless she was present. Now, 3 months later, the sight had become routine enough that most of the crew had stopped watching. But Thelkar still came to the observation deck every day, still tried to understand what he was seeing. "How does she do it?" he asked quietly. Miran checked her instruments. Biometric scans show she's completely relaxed. Heart rate at resting levels. No stress hormones. No fear pheromones whatsoever. "That's not what I mean. How does she make them?" "Peaceful?" "Perhaps," suggested Tactical Officer Gren, "it's because she doesn't see them as threats. We approach predators with weapons and fear. She approaches them with, what would humans call it? Love?" Thelkar's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. Love seemed too simple an answer. Too emotional. Yet he couldn't deny the evidence before his eyes. A new officer entered the observation deck. Young, recently transferred, unaware of the protocols. She moved toward the habitat door, datapad in hand. "Stop." Thelkar's command cracked through the air. The officer froze. "Sir, I just need to—" "You will not approach that habitat while the human is inside. But the cubs are sleeping." "I can just—" As if responding to the suggestion, Corin's eyes snapped open. Despite being 20 meters away and separated by reinforced barriers, every person on the observation deck felt the weight of that stare. The massive cub didn't move, didn't growl, but his meaning was absolutely clear. The officer stepped back quickly. Lyra's eyes opened slowly. She'd been aware the entire time, Thelkar realized. Always watching, always alert, even in her meditation. She glanced up at the observation window and offered a small nod. Everything's fine. Then she gently stroked Corin's head, and the cub's eyes drifted closed again. It's not just that she isn't afraid of them, Thelkar said quietly. They aren't afraid of her either. They trust her to protect them. From what? Asked Mira-En. They're the deadliest creatures on this ship. Thelkar gestured at the observation deck, at the weapons, at the nervous crew. From us. The realization settled over them like a heavy blanket. The cubs knew they were in danger. They'd been torn from their home, trapped in an alien environment, surrounded by beings who feared and misunderstood them. They should have been terrified, aggressive, impossible to handle. But Lyra had given them something more powerful than fear. She'd given them safety. Humans, Gren said with something like awe in his voice, are very strange apex predators. Thelkar watched as Lyra settled back into her meditation, one hand still resting on Corin's head, her presence a shield around the sleeping cubs. Strange indeed. Humans had conquered their own world not through the strongest claws or the sharpest teeth, but through something far more powerful, the ability to make allies of their monsters. In the habitat below, Corin shifted closer to Lyra's side and she smiled in her sleep. Around the galaxy, species trembled at the mention of Vraxian predators, but here in this small space, 7 of the deadliest cubs in existence slept soundly under the watch of a single human. And no one, absolutely no one, dared approach.